Hey guys, welcome to another video. In this video, we'll be revising some important dates and events of World War II and civics. So before starting this video, I'd like to say that this video will be uploaded on IsEqualTo, so be sure to check this channel out. So let's start the video. So first of all, we'll start with the contemporary world, the First and the Second World War. The dates are really important. So the First World War started from 1914 and ended on 1918. Okay, so from July 28th, 1914 to 1918, on the exact same date, First World War was started and First World War ended. Then we move on to Second World War. So Second World War was started on 1st September 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland unofficially, and it lasted till 15th August 1945. 1945. Okay, so do remember the dates: July 28, 1914 to 1918, and 1st September 1939 to 15th August 1945. Why is it called World War? European countries dominated and made colonies. Dominated and made colonies on the rest of the world. When the war began in Europe, it involved the rest of the region too. It affected all the countries of the world. Therefore, the war is referred to as a world war. So the most important point here is that it involved the rest of the world too. It affected all the countries of the world. So in modern day arena, you would see wars between countries which wouldn't have as much impact on the world as it did, as the world wars did. Of course, you may have rising inflation prices, etc., but it does not affect the world as much as what the World War did. So the World War just changed the entire global arena and order for good. Okay, so let's move on to the next point. First World War causes. So the causes are extremely important. You may have to list 2-3 points, and when they ask you certain questions in the board, like state the causes of the First World War or Second World War. So, of course, the major cause is imperialism, then militant nationalism and aggressive nationalism. Formation of alliances division. Now, there were two alliances that were formed in Europe before 1914. So they were triple alliance. You can note this down. They were triple alliance. And there were, I don't think this is the right pronunciation, I'll just pronunciate it as intent. So these are the two alliances that were made in Europe before 1914. And then formation of alliances and division, we've already covered this, of Europe into two rival blocs. Okay, and then we move on to the causes of the Second World War. One of the first causes of the Second World War was failure of League of Nations. So it was a kind of a pre-United Nations organization that was set up to prevent such future world wars happening. Of course, it did happen, and partly it was due to the failure of League of Nations. So there were many nations like Japan, Germany, etc., that were not held accountable for the regions that they illegally occupied. So League of Nations were powerless in that case. Humiliating Treaty of Versailles that was slapped on Germany. It was literally slapped. It had very humiliating terms and conditions. So there were so basically many countries such as France, they annexed the fertile and industrial regions of Germany, and there were many other points and conditions such as the German army was reduced to 100,000 soldiers, and Air Force and Navy was banned. So it was an utter humiliation to the people of Germany. And then rise of Nazism and Fascism. Now, one thing to note here is that Nazism originated in Germany, and Fascism originated. One second. So Fascism originated in Italy. In Italy, Nazism was advocated by Adolf Hitler, the German Führer, and Fascism was propagated by the Il Duce, the Benito Mussolini. Okay, let's move on to the next point. Immediate cause. So one is there is a gradual cause. So the gradual causes were given a few moments back, but an immediate cause, it means that the immediate cause of the World War I, which happened say 1 month or 2 months ago, and not a decade ago. So the first immediate cause was Sarajevo crisis, assassination of the heir to Austria-Hungary by a Serbian terrorist, Black Hand. So Black Hand was an organization that was extremely ultra nationalist, ultra Serbian nationalist, and it was also branded as a terrorist group. On 28th June 1914, on 28th June 1914, and it is officially agreed to that World War I. It was officially agreed that the World War I was started on July instead of June, but The event that unfolded on 28 June 1914 plays a huge role. It was the spark that eventually led to a fire that consumed entire Europe. At Sarajevo crisis of Bosnia, Serbia could not meet all the demands of Austria. So eventually, Austria and Hungary sent a memorandum to ultimatum, not a memorandum, ultimatum to Serbia to agree to follow to some points that Austria had listed. Serbia accepted all of them except one point which could lead to the loss of her sovereignty, and she rejected that term. Now, because Serbia hadn't agreed to all the terms that were set forth in the ultimatum, therefore Austria declared war on Serbia on 28th July 1914. So when they ask you when did World War I start, it started on 28th July 1914. Don't confuse it with June. It started on 28th July 1914. Okay, so let's move on to the immediate cause of Second World War. As I said before, Germany invaded Poland, so it officially started on 1st September 1939. Hitler Germany marched into Poland, and the reason why I said unofficial declaration of war is because when Hitler invaded Poland, so usually there is a announcement of invasion of war in Poland, but Hitler didn't, he didn't offer any proclamation of war on Poland, which caught the soldiers by surprise, and they eventually stormed Poland. But that's for another subject. Demanded Danzig port as it was mainly inhabited by Germans. He could connect East and West Prussia. So basically, Germany during after World War I and between World War II, it looked something like it's maybe a very bad representation, but it looks something like this. So this was Prussia. This was Prussia, and this was the mainland Germany. This was mainland Germany, and this region was ceded to Poland, and this was also known as the Danzig Corridor, which Germany demanded because it wanted to connect the regions of Prussia and mainland Germany together. Okay, he could connect East and West Prussia. So this was West Prussia and this was East Prussia. Okay, let's move on. France and Britain supported Poland and declared war on Germany on 3rd September 1939, leading to the beginning of the war. Okay, let's move on to the next point. Meaning of imperialism. Powerful nations gain control over the underdeveloped countries. Note that underdeveloped countries is the main keyword over here because underdeveloped countries do not have the ability to defend themselves economically or militarily. So if you take the United States in the 18th century when they had liberated themselves from British colonial rule, they were powerful enough, they had the resources, they had the manpower to overthrow them. But say, for example, colonies such as India, they were too weak. In some cases, they were not weak, but they were not united. So it eventually led to the collapse of the united Indian Empire and under the hands of British colonial rule. Gain control over the underdeveloped countries around the world, acquired colonies, example, Britain, France, Japan, and Germany. So these were the colonial powers. And note that Japan was the only Asian colonial power at that time. So there was this talk about European hegemony over the world, that only Europeans could overpower underdeveloped countries, but Japan broke that myth when it conquered the whole of Korean Peninsula and Manchuria and parts of China. Meaning of aggressive nationalism, intense nationalism or competitive patriotism. Love for one's own country and hatred towards other countries. European countries wanted to be world leader. They wanted to be a hegemon, a global superpower. Example, French against Germany, Germany against Russia. Okay, let's move on. Formation of alliances, division of Europe into two rival blocs, triple entente and triple alliance. So triple entente was Britain, France, and Prussia, and triple alliance consisted of Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. Now note that Italy didn't play any active role in the triple alliance because it eventually, during 1915, when it saw that the tide was turning against the triple alliance, so it broke the triple alliance treaty and joined the triple entente. Why League of Nations failed, Germany, okay, so after this, Second World War starts, Germany was not allowed to be its member. USA, Russia was also not its member. The League could only apply economic sanctions and could not provide military assistance towards the face of violence. League failed to stop Italy's aggression on Ethiopia, Japan's on Manchuria, and also failed to stop Germany's aggression on Poland. So these were one of the reasons why the League of Nations failed. Another reason, of course, that is not mentioned over here is that, of course, it is briefly mentioned over here, but basically the point was that the US Congress basically did not allow the United States of America to join the League of Nations. Now, at that point of time, if a superpower joined the League of Nations, it added some credibility to the power and the standing of League of Nations. So if you look at United Nations today, it consists of all major world powers, the US, China, Russia, France, etc. So it adds some credibility and fear so that it maintains the global order. But when USA did not join League of Nations, then that credibility, that belief in League of Nations failed. Okay, humiliating Treaty of Versailles put humiliating condition on Germany like huge war indemnity of $33 billion that it was not capable of providing. Colonies of Germany were given away. Army, Navy, Air Force was reduced. Germany wanted to take revenge. It was humiliated, and when you are humiliated, you want to take revenge on the person who caused you such grievance. Italy was not given Italian-speaking provinces. So when it joined World War One on the side of the Triple Entente, it wanted certain regions that bordered its borders. So it wanted certain regions, but it was not gifted those regions. It thought that, if I fight on behalf of the Triple Entente, then I would get some possessions in return for fighting on their side, but it wasn't given that. So that is where Italy was very disappointed and wanted to avenge this humiliation. Rise of Nazism and Fascism. Nazism grew in Germany under Adolf Hitler, who started Nazi Party. Fascism grew in Italy under Benito Mussolini, who started the Fascist Party. Signed a Treaty of Friendship leading to Berlin, Rome, Tokyo axis. It was due to failure of economy and failure of democracy. Japan invasion of China. Japan invaded Manchuria for resources and for imperialism. So basically, the main thing was resources because Japan was a rapidly industrializing country. And by industrializing, I mean that the establishing of industries, factories, etc., was very, very fast. And in order for the industries to churn out finished products, you needed raw materials, you needed natural and mineral resources. And Japan wasn't gifted the gift of having a truckload of mineral resources. Manchuria, on the other hand, was rich in mineral resources, so it invaded Manchuria and the Korean Peninsula as well to provide for its industries back in the Japanese mainland. Treaty of Versailles, year 28 June 1919. 28 June 1919. Countries that shaped the treaty. Now, these were the main countries that shaped the treaty. It was USA, UK, and France because they were obviously the victors. So leaders are also important to remember. That there was Woodrow Wilson of USA, Lloyd George of UK, and I can't pronounce this, of France. Okay, provisions or clauses of Treaty of Versailles that undermined the power of Germany. Germany declared guilty of aggression. Germany had to pay 33 billion US dollars. Rhine Valley was demilitarized. Now, by demilitarized, I mean that no military force would be stationed there. Restrictions put on numerical strength of the army to 1 lakh soldiers, 1 lakh in the sense 100,000 soldiers. 100,000 soldiers. All submarines were banned. Danzig seaport was made a free city under the control of League of Nations. Alsace-Lorraine to France. Sour coal mines to France for 10 years. 10 years. Eupen and Malmedy to Belgium. So Germany had to seize land regions to other countries, and this was extremely humiliating to the people of Germany. They saw their countries fragmented, they saw their military force undermined, and they sought revenge for this humiliation. Of course, this revenge wasn't granted for a decade or so because of political instability, but then a leader in the name of Adolf Hitler came and told them that I will establish a powerful empire. And because people were ready to believe that he could restore their old supremacy, their old might, so they were ready to elect him as their ruler and eventually a dictator. Okay, so let's move on. How France stood to benefit. Alsace-Lorraine was returned to France, where Germany won in a war many years back. Sour coal mines to France for 10 years. Colonies in Africa were shared. What were the restrictions on defense of Germany? Army was reduced to 1 lakh soldiers. Submarines were banned. Only 15,000 ships were allowed. Air Force was banned. Rhine Valley was demilitarized. What was the economic loss of Germany? $33 billion as war reparation. Danzig became a free port. So Danzig basically was a commercial hub. It was a major commercial hub. It was a major port, and it provided huge you could say, huge financial resources for Germany. And when Danzig became a free port under the control of League of Nations, so it denied Germany that financial and revenue stream to pay back its war reparations. What was the territorial loss of Germany? Alsace Lorraine to France, Star coal mines to France for 10 years, Poland, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia given independence. Okay, rise of dictatorship. So this is Benito Mussolini and this is Adolf Hitler. You can remember them by this square jaw, and you can remember this guy with his stuff. Okay, similarity in aims of fascism and Nazism, anti-intellectualism, one party, one man rule, one party, one man rule. Mostly it was one man rule, one party rule. You could call it a communist type of ideology, but that is another subject. Anti-democracy is the most important factor in the similarity in aims of Nazism and fascism. Anti-communist, it is anti-democratic as well as anti-communist. Belief in aggressive nationalism, belief in racial superiority. Aggressive nationalism. We studied aggressive nationalism before. Too much love for one's own country and hatred, extreme hatred towards other country. So nowadays, patriotism is basically love for one's own country, but there's not much hatred towards other countries. But aggressive nationalism means too much hatred towards the other countries. Headquarters, General Assembly. Okay, now we move on to the UN part of the textbook. Headquarters, General Assembly, New York, USA. Security Council is also in New York, USA. And the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, is in The Hague, Netherlands. Objectives of the UN. The UN is United Nations. Eradicate war, strengthen peace, protect human rights, promote social progress, disarmament, and decolonization. Who can be a member of UN? The countries must be peace-loving. Principles of UN sovereign equality of all member nations. No preference shall be given to one nation over the other. Settle disputes in a peaceful manner and without military intervention. General Assembly, Security Council, and International Court of Justice, or in short abbreviation, you can call it as ICJ. Okay, so this is, I'll just zoom out a bit so that you can see the whole thing properly. Okay, General Assembly to maintain peace, discuss, just label these as points, discuss matters relating to international peace and security and make recommendations on it. The General Assembly can even take military action if the Security Council fails to maintain peace, uniting for peace and resolution, and then make recommendation for the peaceful settlement of disputes. Disputes can, there are many types of disputes, such as economic disputes, or mainly they are regional disputes, the sharing of the water and mostly the sharing of land. Okay, then we move on to the Security Council, maintain international peace and security, take military action against the aggressor, regulate armaments, and investigate any dispute that might lead to international tension. And then finally, apply economic sanctions. This is the fourth point. Okay, now we move on to the International Court of Justice, decides on disputes brought before it by countries. This would be the first point. Give legal advice to UN organs. This is the second point. And the third point, interpret international laws, decide on compensation for those injured on duty. Okay. UN organs composition. So in General Assemblies, there are 193 members at present. Now by members, I mean countries. So in total, there are 193 countries in the United Nations. All members of the UN are members of General Assembly. Each state can send 5 representatives, but each member country only has 1 vote. Now, let's study the organs. Let's study the composition of the Security Council. There are 15 members in Security Council, 10 non-permanent members elected for a 2-year term by the General Assembly, 5 permanent members. It's a short mnemonic, CFUR. So CFUR means China, France, USA, UK, and Russia. Then we move on to the composition of International Court of Justice. 15 judges hailing from different countries, 9-year term, elected by the General Assembly and Security Council. It has a president, 3-year term, registrar, and a deputy registrar. So remember the terms: 9-year term, elected by the General Assembly and Security Council. Okay, let's move on. UN specialized agencies. So there is UNICEF, United Nations Children's Fund. There is WHO, World Health Organization. And then there's finally UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. Establishment of these specialized agencies of UN is also important to remember. You'll have the establishment of UNICEF, which was on December 11th, 1946. Then the establishment of WHO on 7th April 1948, and then finally establishment of UNESCO in 1946. So you can note whatever I'm writing down in your notebooks or anywhere else. To provide emergency food and healthcare to children in countries. So these are the functions of these specialized agencies. This is the function of UNICEF. This is the function of WHO, and this is the function of UNESCO. So to provide emergency food and healthcare to children in countries, special emphasis on children because the specialized agency stands for Children's Fund. World Health Organization, WHO, it stands for International Public Health. And then finally, UNESCO to contribute to international peace and security by promoting and collaboration through education, science, and culture. Headquarters, New York, USA. UNICEF is in USA. It is headquartered in New York. And then WHO is also headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. And UNESCO is headquartered in Paris, France. Let's move on. Functions are detailed functions are provide safe drinking water, provide immediate help to children and mothers in emergencies, and finally provide funds for paper, provide papers, provide funds for textbooks. And then the function of WHO is distribution of safe and effective vaccines and drugs, provide safe drinking water, conducts health research in communicable diseases, provides training to nurses, doctors, and teachers. Teachers should be mentioned here. Functions of UNESCO, right? Yes, UNESCO. Focus on elimination of illiteracy. You only need to learn 4 or 5 of these points. Focus on elimination of illiteracy, help in production of textbooks. And then in culture, you have translate rare manuscripts, protect world monuments. And then finally in science, you have encouraged study of social sciences and conference for scientists to discuss various matters related to science. Okay, let's move on to the non-aligned movement. Established in 1961, Belgrade, Yugoslavia. First summit was in 1961, Belgrade, Yugoslavia, meaning after the Second World War, 2 power blocks emerged, the USA following capitalism, USSR following communism. So this was the American bloc, and this was the Soviet bloc. This is also known as the West bloc, and this is known as the Eastern bloc. Starting of the Cold War, independent nations did not want to align themselves with either of the 2 power blocks. So you can imagine yourself after World War II ended in 1945, the major colonial powers, Britain, France, were forced to relinquish their colonies in the wave of decolonization around the world. Many countries after 1945 became independent, including India. And these newly independent countries were forced to pick sides. It was like you're playing in a playground and you have 2 bullies and you have to take one side. Now, in order to provide freedom for countries to choose their own foreign policy, NAM, non-aligned movement, was set up so that newly independent countries who were former colonies did not be pressurized by these power blocks to choose a side. Okay, that was a brief explanation. Independent nations did not want to align themselves with either of 2 power blocks, USA or Russia. It's not known as Russia at that time, it's known as USSR or the Soviet Union. But it's the same meaning. These nations are free to express their independent views on all important international issues without any interference on the 2 power blocks. So NAM basically stood for neutrality. The architects of NAM, so Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, President Nasser of Egypt, and President Sukarno of Indonesia, his photo is not given here, and President Tito of Yugoslavia. Okay, let's move on. Objectives of NAM to protect the freedom of newly independent nations, to protect human rights, eliminate causes leading to war, around international war, settle international issues peacefully, and strengthen the United Nations. So this was a brief summary on the historical part of the entire class 10th ICSE syllabus. So I hope you learned something from this video.